Hey everyone, welcome to Humanities 202, Western Culture. Today I just want to give you an overview of the class in general and the study of humanities and take a look at some of the main themes that generally any humanities course will study. Just to provide an overview, I wanted to start here with this quote that comes from the conference report. It says, "Generally there is in man a divinity which strives to push him onward and upward. We believe that this power within him is the spirit that comes from God. Man lived before he came to this earth, and he is here now to strive to perfect the spirit within him. At some time in his life, every man is conscious of a desire to come in touch with the infinite. His spirit reaches out for God. This sense of feeling is universal, and all men ought to be, in the deepest truth, engaged in the same great work, the search for and the development of spiritual peace and freedom." And what we're going to take a look at this semester, starting with the Renaissance, is how artists are seeking to aspire beyond this mortal realm and seeking to find some aspect of the eternal or the divine within them and within their works. And so it's fascinating to me as we study the variety of artists, whether it's painters or sculptors or composers or writers or filmmakers, how close to truth they become as they're seeking to understand the basic essence of what is life and what does it all mean. Just to give you a sense of what the humanities are, some people are unfamiliar with the humanities and what they entail, and just want to give you a sense of what to expect out of this course, or really any course in the humanities. The humanities studies human life and investigates previous and current insights into the human condition, asking questions like, what is the meaning of life? What is human nature? What does it mean to be human? Etc. Completing this course will give students a better appreciation of our world, our culture, and the values that we as humans share. And a lot of what we're going to study in this class is going to be in the past, right? We're going to start with the 1400s and move progressively into the 21st century. But the majority of it's going to be in the past. And the question is, well, why do we study all of these, dead writers and thinkers? And part of the answer to that is we can understand ourselves and where our ideas come from. And that gives us a better understanding of the world in which we live. I like this quote here by President Hinckley. He says, "The study of humanities gives an aspect of living that is essential. You need technology, you need the professions, you need all those things, but we need the heart also. And the humanities speaks to the heart, men's aspirations for the good and the beautiful." And I think that's a good quote to keep in mind as we're all kind of hurriedly going through our studies, trying to get through and graduate so we can move on to our careers, which is a noble endeavor. But it's also important to think about that life is not just merely meant to be survived, it's meant to be lived. And there's things that are beyond just making money or providing for our families, which is important. But there's things about this life that we need to slow down and to truly appreciate. And that's really what the humanities seeks to do, is to understand those deeper elements, those deeper questions of life. I just wanted to give a brief overview as we get into the discussion today on the humanities and what they do. And this will help you to guide your notes. And so here we're going to take a look at three main points. The other one is what is art here. So the first point that we're going to take a look at is what are humans, right? As we think about that, that's a big part of humanities, right? The root word of humanities is human. And so it's studying this idea of humans. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Kind of a question. And so I have 4 points under this that I want you to know that you might see again on an upcoming test. And so I'm just outlining it here just to help guide your notes. Some people aren't familiar with taking notes, and they ask me, what am I supposed to take notes on? And so I'm giving you an overview here of what to think about. Then we'll take a look at what is reality and what have some people thought about that. And so I'll give you a couple quotes to think about from 4 great philosophers as we start to understand what is reality. And then we'll leave off today with the question of what is art. And a lot of what we're going to study within the humanities is going to be not just studying human beings and society, that would be more of sociology, but humanities studies these questions, these big questions of life, and seeks to investigate how artists, writers, and philosophers have come up with these understandings. And so most of the humanities is studying cultural manifestations. And so what I've done today is, you see on the screen here is a self-portrait by a German artist named Albrecht Dürer. I'm going to have him be the universal artist that we study through. And it could be any artist that I chose to use their works. But I'm going to choose one artist to kind of narrow it in and show you how artists are seeking to understand these big questions. Even if they're not necessarily meaning to, it's not so, some of them aren't necessarily trying to be philosophical. Many are, though. What we're going to do within the humanities is try to investigate the essence of what are these artists saying, what can we learn from this, and how can we understand the human condition. And so Albrecht Dürer here is a good artist to start with. He comes from the Renaissance. He's the northern master. I would compare him to Michelangelo of the North, and we'll take a look at him in a couple of weeks. But he really does focus on the investigation of these deeper questions, and a lot of his art focuses on the self. Here is a self-portrait and understanding who is he in the overall context of humanity. And so that's something that he was particularly concerned with, and it's something that we should all be concerned with, is how do we fit into this larger classification of human beings, and what's it mean to be human. And with that, I want to ask you a question. We talked a little bit about this in our Zoom meeting, and I'm gonna pick up on this with our discussion board for the week. But if someone was to come up to you and ask you, what is a human being and how are we different from other beings of creation, I would like you to think about what would you say, right? What are some thoughts that you would have? How are we different from other beings that God has created, right? What attributes are solely part of the human condition? And the number one thing that a lot of people start with, which is good, is that we're created in the image of God. And that's a valid point. And that's something that certainly no other being of creation can claim. And so that's a good starting point. Within the humanities, we start to look at that and what that means and its implications. Does that mean that we're destined to be like him? Does that mean we're inherently good? What does that really mean? And then within the humanities, we kind of expand beyond that and think about what else is out there that distinguishes us between other beings of creation. Let's take a look at D&C. This is a good place to start, section 93, verse 29. And it says, "Man was also in the beginning with God. Intelligence, or the light of truth, was not created or made, neither indeed can be." And so what we learn from D&C is that human beings are intelligent. They have this intelligence. And more specifically, D&C describes that intelligence as the light of truth, or having the light of Christ. And this is this intelligence we all had at the very beginning that God used to create us. And so that's the basic essence according to D&C. And I have another image by Albrecht Dürer. He did a lot of sketches. This is his rhinoceros. And as during the Renaissance, we were beginning to scour the globe to understand where the various lands and countries that are out there and the various inhabitants. And he drew this image from a word of mouth. Someone said that they went to Africa and they came back and described this image to him, made some preliminary sketches. And based on the preliminary sketches and the word of mouth, this is what Albrecht Dürer came up with. But the idea here is that he's interested in studying life, studying what it's about, and studying how we're different from other beings of creation. Taking a look at Aristotle, he's also a good one to start with. He says, "The power of speech is intended to set forth the expedient and inexpedient, and therefore likewise the just and the unjust. And it is a characteristic of man that he alone has any sense of good or evil, good and evil, of just and unjust, and the like. And the association of living beings who have this makes the sense makes a family and a state. And so what we see here, according to Aristotle, what he says mainly distinguishes us from other beings of creation is the power of speech, the power to communicate. But as we delve deeper into that idea, we start to learn, right, through biology and through studying other beings of creation, that we're really not unique in this. Other beings of creation have the power of speech, right? Or at least communication, right? Dolphins can communicate, whales can communicate, bees and ants can communicate. And so that's not necessarily what makes us different per se, right? So we have to start looking at the complexity to that. I think Aristotle's ideas are a good starting point, but they certainly aren't the end all be all of that. But he does delve deeper into this because he suggests that the power of speech does give us something else. It's not just the ability to communicate, but we then use that idea to have morality, right? The sense of justice or injustice. Or good and evil, this idea of morality. And so then we can take a look at, well, maybe that's what distinguishes us from other beings of creation, the idea that we have a difference of understanding that gets back to the D&C quote of having the light of Christ, right? That we have morality. But if you look deeper into that, we have to question, do other beings of creation have morality, right? As that lion is chasing down that gazelle on the savannah, is it really thinking, should I be vegetarian, right? Or is it just acting? And so in a lot of ways, animals don't have morality, right? They don't necessarily have that essence, that ability to use that intellect to be able to decide from right and wrong. However, if we delve deeper into this notion just a little bit more, and that's what we do in the humanities, is we keep digging deeper to really think about what are the implications of this. For instance, I have my dog, and when I come home and she's done something wrong, I have a little tiny Maltipoo at home, and whenever we come home and she's done something wrong, she has her tail between her legs and she's hiding out in the closet. Right? Does that suggest that she has a sense of morality, of good and evil, of right and wrong, right? She knows she's done something wrong. I mean, some people might argue that she just doesn't want the consequences, but someone else might argue that the understanding of cause and effect, right, is morality. It's the understanding that your actions could have better consequences or worse consequences depending on what you do, right? And so maybe that is a sense of morality. And then Aristotle pushes beyond that, right, to give us more of a deeper understanding. So I like how he has different layers to this understanding of the human condition. He says, in the association of living beings who have this sense makes a family and a state. And so he says that we use this language to create morality, and we use this morality to create a sense of belonging, a sense of community through our families and through the state, the governments that we all have. And so it's kind of interesting that he starts to suggest that we start to create these groups, and within these groups we start to create our own language, and within this language we create our own sense of morality. And so this is what makes us different and unique. But again, as you delve into that, it might be a little bit more complex. There's a little bit of families and sense of communities and right and wrong within nature as well. And I point to dolphins as a sense of family as well, as just one of many examples. I like this other quote that's attributed to him. He says, "The aim of the wise is not to secure pleasure, but to avoid pain." And I think that's kind of an interesting thought, right? I think a lot of people kind of, particularly today, get stuck in that sense of just wanting to focus on more and more pleasure, right? I just want to binge watch on Netflix, or I just want to, surf the web for hours on end. And don't get me wrong, I have my own, struggles with that as well. But life is more than just pleasure. It's trying to reduce pain. And I think the pain that he's suggesting here is not just trying to avoid, stepping on something or stubbing your toe. It's avoiding, further pain of others, right? In that sense of community. How do we avoid creating the harm, as much harm as possible to others? And so that's something that we can think about as we think about the world around us today. Plato has a slightly different understanding, as kind of adds to this ongoing discussion. He says the soul of man is immortal and unperishable. And so he suggests something a little bit different, right? And so what's interesting about this is they all have aspects of truth within their understanding. And what he suggests is that we have this eternal nature to us. And I point to this one is different from Albrecht Dürer, but I just love it so much, and it pertains specifically to Plato's ideas. We have The Death of Socrates by a 18th century philosopher, artist, Jacques-Louis David. And this is entitled The Death of Socrates. And so here you have Socrates who's drinking the hemlock. He's been put on trial for treason. And rather than allowing the state to put him to death, he grabs the hemlock here from one of his students. And he's teaching up to the very end, using, as Aristotle would say, his power of speech to communicate and to create that sense of morality. And here, the morality here is it's unjust for him to be put to death, because it was really a sham trial. The government was afraid of people thinking for themselves, and he was teaching people how to think for themselves. And the state saw that as dangerous, and so they decided to put him to death. And then at the very foot of his bed, you have his number one prodigy, his number one student, Plato, who is actually the one that wrote Socrates' ideas down. And a lot of the ideas of Plato stem from Socrates. And here Socrates is comforting his students, suggesting that life is only a release from the body and the soul. And so, but the soul continues to live. And so this idea that humanity, what makes us different is this eternal nature, this eternal quality. Let's take a look at Immanuel Kant. He has some interesting ideas to add to this. He says, all our knowledge begins with the senses, proceeds then to understanding, and ends with reason. There is nothing higher than reason. And so this idea of not just knowledge, right? There's a difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? Google has a lot of knowledge. It doesn't have a lot of wisdom, right? And so wisdom is the application of knowledge, knowing what to do with it. And that's what he's suggesting reason is, the ability to utilize the skills of knowledge and then be able to use them appropriately and justly onto others. And so as we think about that, so one of the things that he suggests, very similar to Aristotle, is that our knowledge, right, that intellect is what makes us different. But I again want to question that, deeper elements of that. I've seen a crow on the top of a wire dropping a nut in the middle of a street and waiting for cars to pass by to crack the nut open so it can swoop down and eat the nut. And I wonder if that is an aspect of reason, right? If that is an aspect of intellect and intelligence. And it seems to me, using skills, thinking about cause and effect relationships, that is an element of reason. It's an element of understanding and an application of knowledge. And so humans might not necessarily be the only creatures that have that. But then we have to question to what degree. Maybe humans have that to a greater degree, right? Another quote that's attributed to Kant, and you can kind of take this for what you think of it. He says, genius is the ability to independently arrive at understanding concepts that would normally have been taught by another person. And so the ability to kind of start to think for ourselves, that was a big concept for Immanuel Kant, is not to be influenced by others. And so he would not be too pleased with people going on social media and being heavily influenced by what they read online. He suggests that we need to be able to think and act for ourselves. And a big part of the humanities is seeking to do that, right? And so here we see Albrecht Dürer at the bottom, Saint Jerome at his study, and Saint Jerome is one of the founding fathers of Christianity for Roman Catholicism. And here he is at his study. He's independently thinking. He's independently coming up with his own concepts and thinking about knowledge as he scours the scriptures, and then he's using that to develop the Christian or the Catholic doctrine that's going to be built upon. So using the knowledge and then gaining wisdom from that. I like Viktor Frankl's quotes. Viktor Frankl is a 20th century philosopher. I'll talk a little bit more about him later, but just his understanding of humans. He says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz. He was a concentration camp survivor, and he saw his family be brutally put to death by the Nazis in Auschwitz. And what he suggests is all of his freedoms were stripped from him. The only thing that he could keep is his ability to choose, his ability to create his own existence. And And so he suggests that that ability to choose makes us different, right? And so think about that as kind of, I really like this element, right, to understanding the differences between other creatures, because we have to think, do other creatures choose, right? And in some ways, right, if I gave my dog, a piece of ham or a piece of turkey, right, the dog can go one way or another. But then we have to think about, are animals really choosing, or are they just acting on their survival instincts, right? So he's suggesting what makes us different is we can have the ability to choose to live beyond just merely surviving. Too often, people today are only focusing on survival and not really focusing on living. And so that was what he suggests, is that we have to choose to live. And I like this image by, excuse me, Albrecht Dürer. This is Christ carrying the cross, choosing to lay down his life for humanity. And so what's interesting about all of these images of Albrecht Dürer is how he's kind of coming to similar understandings, even though he's not necessarily a philosopher, he's an artist. But artists are thinking, right, about how to create, how to shape their understanding. And so studying their works gives us a greater understanding of their thoughts, and it can also give us a greater understanding of our own, right? Come to a greater understanding of ourselves and how we fit in. I want to take a look at what reality is. As we start to understand ourselves, we have to think about what is reality, and is our reality the actual reality, right? As if you were to watch an accident in the street, for instance, a car back into another car, you go and talk to those two different people that are part of the accident, you're going to get two very different versions of what actually happened. And so then the question is, what is reality? And so this is another question that the Humanities covers, is the idea of how do we make sense of the world around us. It's not just about understanding ourselves, but how we make sense of ourselves. And that's kind of a deeper element. And maybe that's part of what makes us different from other beings of creation, is they're not necessarily considering their own reality. They're not necessarily considering how they fit into other organisms or species. They're just thinking about their survival. He says, quote, "Reality is created by the mind. We can change our reality by changing our mind." Right? And so the idea here is that really we create, through our own interpretations, we create a narrative about the events, and we select what events in our own life that we emphasize and which ones we diminish. And so we are able to create our own reality, our own version of reality. And I like this one by Albrecht Dürer. This is Melancholia, where an angel who you normally would think of would be very happy and angelic and joyous. It's just kind of melancholy is kind of another word for depressed or very sad. And he just kind of sits down and kind of is having a ho-hum day. He's just kind of like, nothing's up. But the idea is that we can choose that perception a lot of times, right, of understanding the world around us by what events we choose to emphasize in our own lives. And then Shakespeare says the following. He says, this comes from Macbeth. He says, "Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." Another quote by Shakespeare is, "All the life is a stage." And so he's suggesting that we become kind of the actors in this play of life, and we kind of walk around and we create our own reality by the choices that we make. And then let's take a look at Jean-Paul Sartre. He is a 20th century philosopher, and he says, "In life, a man commits himself, draws his own portrait, and there is nothing but that portrait." And so it suggests that a lot of times our reality has this tunnel vision, that we are choosing to, understand our own circumstances because we have a hard time understanding someone else's, or seeing through someone else's lens. And so if you have a conflict with someone else, mainly what you're seeing is only your perspective, your interpretation. And we struggle to see through someone else's eyes. And so that's another element of reality. And what we truly need to do is try to move beyond that and to see past our own reality, realizing that it's limited, that we're not the sole proprietors of truth, that we can understand deeper, right, through understanding someone else's eyes. And that's really what the humanities seeks to do. It seeks to diversify, broaden our experiences, diversify our cultural awareness in order to be able to understand reality better, right? Because reality is not just made up of our own interpretations or understanding. It's made up of everyone else's too, right? And so philosophers here are suggesting that more often than not, we create our own reality because we have that failed understanding or ability to see beyond ourselves. And here's Albrecht Dürer's another self-portrait where he's studying himself. And studying oneself is important, right? It's important to understand ourselves and who we are, but it's also important to kind of see beyond that. And I wanted to kind of leave off our discussion of reality to a sense by returning back to Viktor Frankl. And this is kind of interesting because he's in the concentration camp. He's seen the worst of humanity. He's seen people that were just brutally put to death or brutally used as means of science projects in order to, or people that were being, their skins were being taken from them and used into things like a lampshade. He saw the gross horrors of the human experience. But this is what he says about reality. He says, being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself. And so reality is not, in his mind, is not just about seeing our own understanding. It's about diversifying. He says, be it a meaning to fulfill or another human being to encounter. The more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve another person to love, the more human he is and the more he actualizes himself. And so the more that we can transform beyond ourselves, the more we can actually understand reality and the human beings around us. I want to take a look just kind of lastly here about art. And as a lot of our discussion within humanities studies art, or whether that art is the art of, painting or the art of literature or drama or the art of film or even the art of ideas with philosophy. It's going to be a big part of understanding human creation, human manifestations. And so I want to think about what art is. The aim of art, according to Aristotle, is not to represent the outward appearance of things, but rather their inward or their inner significance. And so art is more than just merely painting the outside world. It's the artist trying to understand deeper elements of truth, deeper elements of reality that we then can all learn from and draw beyond. And so, in a sense, art should be philosophical. It should be trying to understand ourselves and the larger aspects of our community. I like this one here, this portrait by Dürer. And what he's seeking to do is not just try to paint, visually this representation of this young man, although that's a part of it. He's trying to understand how this young man thinks and how he sees, and try to get us to see him in a new light and in a new understanding. And that's really what artists seek to do. Plato says the following about art. He says, great art depicts a moral standard of living, right? This idea of morality, and tells us how we can be better, to elevate ourselves, to look beyond our own understanding, to seek to understand others and within our community. And I like this one here by Dürer. This one is the knight. Here you see the knight on the horse, and then death has followed him. He's kind of in the shadow of death, and then the devil is right behind. And so here we see the moral standard of living here is the choice that this brave knight goes and serves for his king or his kingdom, which we see in the far background of the image with a castle there. But chooses to go out and to serve and to, rather than focusing on himself, seeks to help others. I like this other quote that's attributed to Plato as well. He says, it should say no one. It says no one, but it should say no one. That's a typo. No one is more hated than he who speaks the truth. And so in a lot of senses, as we're going to go throughout the artists, is that they're not necessarily going to be widely accepted at first. Because of the truth that they provide. A lot of times they're going to be rejected for their ideas. And then just to leave off here with a couple of BYU professors on their understanding of art, They say, Rick Moody says, the essence of theatrical art is the portrayal of emotion, spiritual, intellectual, or physical conflict. And so he suggests that art is really about conflict, because that's what life is about, right? Life is about conflict and our ability, our struggle to overcome that. He says that carries the pathway to deeper empathy and enlightened understanding. And so this idea is that art is kind of a moral tale to tell us how we can, kind of building upon Plato's ideas, that moral kind of essence of how do we live a better life. But it's this idea of how do we overcome conflict? How can we, through understanding that ability to overcome conflict, have greater empathy for others, see beyond ourselves, and have more enlightened understanding for the world around us. And then just to leave off here, Donald Marshall says the following. He says, the aim of all art, all real art, is high, to lift us, to expand us, to deepen us. And that's really what great art seeks to do, is to push us beyond our current understanding. And sometimes that's why art initially isn't accepted at first, is because it's pushing beyond the boundaries. And that can be uncomfortable for some people. At first, at least, we're going to see some scandalous artists of the Renaissance in the next couple of weeks. But then they push us to expand our understanding and to deepen us, to help us to grow and have a greater understanding, to make us more fully conscious of what it means to live here upon this earth as part of the human race. And I think that's a good way, a good quote to leave off with, and it's a good understanding of what we think or what we're seeking to do within the humanities, some of the goals that we're going to seek to accomplish this semester.